So let me tell you, I was not that excited to watch this movie because over the summer there was another Hulu movie that starred Joey King, the girl from the Kissing Booth franchise, and the movie was called The Princess or something. It was something with princess in the title. I saw a lot of trailers for it. I was like, I'm so excited to cover this on my channel. It's Joey King and her follow-up project to the Kissing Booth movies. And then I watched the movie and it is very gory. And that's not the vibe I got from the ads at all. I mean, in hindsight, I can see how there's a lot of combat in the trailer. And it had the name Princess in the title. Like, what do you expect me to think? Instead of fun princessy things, we got a lot of violent fighting and like bludgeoning people to death and like eye gouging violence. And I even watched, I think, like 45 minutes of the movie, like waiting for the fun or romance or comedy parts to come in. And they never did. It was like straight combat from the very beginning. And I was so mad. So I'm glad Rosaline provided exactly what I was originally expecting from that princess movie. Hello and welcome back to the Miscellaneous channel where we do miscellaneous things. I'm Zeleny. I typically cover TV, pop culture, internet trends, and other miscellaneous things on this channel, so subscribe if that's your vibe. Today I wanted to talk to y'all about a new movie on Hulu called Rosaline. This is a very interesting movie, a new take on a very old story. So I got a lot of trailers for Rosaline, and like I said, I was not excited because I've been burned before by Joey King's period project. So let's get right into my usual question: is Rosaline worth watching? As you can tell by my sort of positive review so far, I do think it is worth watching. I thought it was a really fun and lighthearted movie. The aesthetic is old-timey and Renaissance, but the dialogue and mannerisms of people is more modern. I'm not a big fan of the old-timey dialogue. I think it just takes too much brain power to decipher, especially in real time during a movie. Very quickly I saw in this movie that that was not the case, and they make it more modern and just generally funny. I think if you like rom-coms, this movie is just a great one to watch. If you like enemies to lovers dynamics, you will like this movie. But I kind of find that anyone who likes comedy would probably like this movie. Might not end up being your favorite movie ever, but like it had like a very accessible humor to it. Like it wasn't too subtle but not too overt. It wasn't too ridiculous but still fun and hijinksy. And it was also kind of like wholesome comedy. Like it wasn't the kind of comedy that's more raunchy and edgy and might offend people or might not age well. It's aware of it too. It's not funny on accident or like funny to laugh at it. It's definitely just a solid comedy. And it does have those romance aspects too. It's just not all about the one romance, as with any Shakespeare thing, because Shakespeare is great at having a million characters going on. Also, if you had a Romeo and Juliet phase in high school like I did, you might like this movie. I was kind of concerned with rehashing a story that has been told to death. We have the Leonardo DiCaprio version and Romeo and Juliet. Did anyone see that? I saw that in theaters. I don't know why. It was a weird time in the growing up in the 2000s and 2010s. I feel like I saw so much crap in theaters, and I see so many critics rag on streaming movies and be like, this was a good movie on streaming, but it would never hold up in theaters. And I'm just like, I saw the worst garbage throughout my youth in theaters. Like, being a movie in a theater to me doesn't mean like Oscar worthy or brilliant special effects like Marvel movies or whatever. It's like Rosaline, I found, is like theater quality to me for a rom-com. The threshold for being in a theater though just doesn't mean that much to me, if that makes sense. But yeah, I remember in high school I had my little Romeo and Juliet phase because in the US, or at least where I was, you usually study Romeo and Juliet around freshman year of high school. It just so happened freshman year of high school for me was around the time Love Story by Taylor Swift came out. Y'all know I'm not necessarily a Swiftie, but you know, I could get into some Love Story. I don't mind some Love Story. I remember we had to do a final project on Romeo and Juliet, and the teacher was literally like, you cannot use Love Story by Taylor Swift in your final video projects because it was such a problem. I feel like a lot of people go through a Romeo and Juliet phase. So Rosaline has a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes, and that is the critic score. The audience score is an 81. I agree more with the audience score. I'd give it closer to like an 85. But I don't mind an 81. I feel like, okay, I can get behind that audience score. As usual, I feel like the critics demand too much of rom-coms, and I couldn't find many solid complaints from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes for why the score is this way. The only kind of complaint was that it had some cliches to it, but I think when you're playing with such an old story, there's going to be some cliches through that, and also, it's a good rom-com. It's going to have some cliches, and I like that they incorporated some rom-com cliches because I always think for a rom-com, we like seeing cliches. It just does have to have some fresh and unique elements to it to make it not feel super boring. And this one had the fresh element of being a kind of new iteration of Romeo and Juliet, having the Renaissance setting. So let's talk about Rosaline. What is the background? Like I said, you can find this movie on Hulu, and it was produced by 20th Century Fox. It was directed by Karen Maine, and her previous work includes a movie called Obvious Child that stars Jenny Slate. You might know her from Parks and Rec, Money Please. That's Jenny Slate. She also plays like Marcel the Shell, I think. She's a very interesting artist or entertainer. Karen Maine also did a movie called Yes, God, Yes, which is a Netflix movie starring Natalia Dyer from Stranger Things. I've seen that one promoted on Netflix, and I'm not sure if it's good. It's kind of like low priority on my list to watch. Let me know if you think Yes, God, Yes is a good movie and I should watch it, because I haven't heard anything about it, so I haven't like watched it, but it's kind of on my list. Rosaline was written by a writer duo named Scott Neustadter I can't say his last name to save my life, and Michael H. Weber. And this writer duo most notably wrote 500 Days of Summer. That movie is responsible for such a domino effect, I feel like, in pop culture. But anyways, that's a different video. So these two were the writers for the movie, but they were adapting a book written by Rebecca Serle called When You Were Mine. I always find the best rom-coms and teen movies are based on books. Like, if you know a good rom-com, look it up. It's probably based on a book. Apparently Rebecca Serle, I haven't read her work. I don't read any fiction pretty much. I want to get into it, but it's hard. Rebecca Serle wrote a series called Famous in Love that was adapted into a freeform show that had Becca Thorne. Who's Becca Thorne? Bella Thorne. The sequel book to Famous in Love was called Truly, Madly, Famously. That title just made me laugh for no reason. I love it. I want to read the book just for that title. Let's talk about the cast. It was kind of a lot of interesting actors in Rosaline. The star who carries the movie, honestly, is Kaitlyn Dever. You might recognize her from Booksmart. She was one of the two, the one that's not Jonah Hill's sister, Beanie Feinstein. Fieldstein? Beanie. You know Beanie. I didn't mean to reduce her to Jonah Hill. Like, she's a big star on her own. But yeah, Kaitlyn Dever, she's also in that show that got some Emmys, Dopesick. And she's a really talented actress. Rosaline made me a big fan of her because she really brought that character to life and gave it a lot of personality. Also, someone that stood out to me in the cast played her dad, and that was Bradley Whitford, who you might recognize as the dad from Get Out, which every time I see this man, I'm like, I do not trust him. Also in noteworthy adult roles was Minnie Driver, who I recognize her more from Ella Enchanted, though she has had a very like long and prestigious career that I'm sure Ella Enchanted is a footnote in, but she played just a very similar kind of caretaker character in Ella Enchanted, which is a very underrated movie, by the way. If you haven't given it a rewatch in a while, it's so good. Playing opposite Kaitlyn Dever is Sean Teal, who I didn't know him. Apparently he was in Skins, the UK one. To me, he kind of looked like a mix of Noah Centineo and Oscar Isaac somehow. But also Also, I just want to give a shout out to some of the smaller roles. I felt like the actors did really funny jobs portraying. One is a newcomer named Spencer Stevenson who plays Paris in the movie. Also, Nico Hiraga as Steve the courier. He was so funny in this. He's in Booksmart and Moxie on Netflix, which is a movie I did watch, but it's kind of for tweens. Also, Alistair Tooby as Tybalt. You might remember Tybalt from the Romeo and Juliet play. I was obsessed with his acting. He like camped it up so much as Tybalt in this like obnoxious way. It was so funny to me. I don't know, maybe it was just me, but... And the roles of Romeo and Juliet, we had Kyle Allen and Isabella Merced. I didn't know them before this, and apparently Isabella is kind of from the Nickelodeon area of TV and has done some voice acting too. Let's go ahead and discuss the movie, starting with technical aspects that I found noteworthy. The costuming is very elaborate and really gorgeous. And it is set in Italy. So that's the aspect of the movie that evokes Shakespeare. And it has those rom-com cliches that we love so much. Like, you know, when two people go and grab something and their pinkies touch, that's the kind of cliches you'll find in this movie. But we love it. I love it, at least. I love that. And the structure of the movie is about Rosaline, who, if you don't remember in the Romeo and Juliet original play, Rosaline is a tiny, tiny character mentioned, I don't know if just once or a couple of times. Basically, Rosaline is Romeo's previous Juliet, and he was having a similar affair with Rosaline, and then he ditched her for Juliet. So this movie is able to do a lot with the character of Rosaline because we don't have much information about her. She never appears on stage in the original play. But throughout the movie, Rosaline does run into Romeo and Juliet, and she's very entangled with their story. So we still see a lot of the familiar scenes and elements from the original play. There is a really famous play called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead that is a similar format but about Hamlet, and that play was very critically acclaimed and successful. I looked it up and it's from 1966, so I don't know why I thought it was older, like closer to like when Hamlet came out, I guess. Like, I don't even know what century. I'm not good at time periods before recent history, but I found it interesting that Rosaline is kind of a modern Rosencrantz and Guildenstern for people today. It's a good way to give a fresh take to a very retold story. This movie didn't just include modern speech, it had a lot of modern music as part of the soundtrack as well. I think the soundtrack is where period pieces incorporate modernity a lot. Like, I specifically recall in Baz Luhrmann's Great Gatsby, they use a lot of hip-hop songs and pop songs, even though it's set in 1920s America. Rosaline did something similar by incorporating modern music into the Renaissance setting. Also, the trailer, it uses I Love It by Icona Pop, like the soundtrack of 2012. So some songs are just used as is. For example, towards the intro and when they show the title of the movie, they play This Will Be. I don't know if that's the name of the song. This song. And I loved how they utilized this song because they used it when Romeo and Rosaline were just saying how much they loved each other and how they were going to be together forever, and then this song comes in and the lyrics of the song are this will be an everlasting love, and we know, because we know the story, that this will not be an everlasting love. So I liked how that song was used sort of ironically for a couple that was not gonna last. And they even emphasized that irony by like cutting that song really short and moving on to the next scene. It's almost like a record scratch, like cutting off the song. It's funny because this song is used a lot in movies. I specifically remember in Cinderella's story this song is used, and it's used very unironically. So it's kind of cool to see old stereotypical rom-com songs repurposed into a more ironic sense of humor that is more popular today. But other music throughout the movie was more remixed, or I don't know how to call it. The production was changed to make it sound more Renaissance-ish. You already know I was obsessed with the Dancing on My Own cover. It was like Robin from the Tavern. Like, I loved hearing that. And also there was one point where she was sat in her bedroom and there was kind of a Renaissance-y all by myself instrumental playing. It was funny because she was depressed in her room after a breakup, and there was an actual guy playing the violin for her in the room, because back then they did not have Spotify and Bluetooth speakers. It was a cute way to incorporate modern teenage isms into an old-timey setting. I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, but I am kind of into like Renaissance or tavern versions of pop songs I like. I don't listen to that genre all the time, and I forget what even the genre is called. I don't know if it's like the tavern or Renaissance or what. Sometimes a mood just strikes and I'm like, you know what, I want to hear bad romance, but for the tavern. And I play it, and it's funny, and I laugh. I guess I kind of listen to it as comedy a little bit, because it's funny to try to recognize songs. So let's go ahead and talk about the plot. Rosaline is our main character. She is a Capulet, which I didn't know that about the original play, that Rosaline was a Capulet too. So her affair with Romeo is taboo and secret at the beginning, just like it was with Juliet. And Rosaline, right off the bat, we see that she's an independent and outspoken and relatable type of character. We see her and Romeo at her balcony, and Romeo is talking like Shakespearean to her to be romantic, even though he doesn't normally talk like that to her. At first, I think it's meant to trick the audience into thinking, oh, this whole movie is gonna be Shakespearean sounding, and then he breaks that character and is like, I just thought it sounded romantic. Rosaline has a nurse similar to Juliet who takes care of her and also knows her secret and supports her in it. This is a character played by Minnie Driver, and it reminds me of her character Mandy in Ella Enchanted, which I think in Ella Enchanted she was in love with a book. It makes sense in the story, but she was the one in love with a book. Rosaline also has a best friend who she confides in named Paris, and if you really know Romeo and Juliet, you might know who that is down the line, but Paris becomes important later on in the whole Romeo and Juliet story. We also see Rosaline's dad, and he is pushing for Rosaline to get an arranged marriage. He has married off all of his daughters, and Rosaline is the last one. Rosaline, being very independent and outspoken, does not want an arranged marriage. Also, she already has a secret boyfriend in Romeo who she thinks she's going to be with forever. So later on, we see Romeo on Rosaline's balcony again, and he says I love you to her, which is something she had wanted. However, he also mentions that in the future he's excited for them to run off together, get married, and her take care of all the kids while he becomes a poet. And Rosaline is turned off by that and has trouble saying I love you back to Romeo. Instead, she just invites him to the Capulet ball because it's going to be a masquerade ball and they can dance in the open together, and that should be fun. So Romeo accepts that invite, and we know that at that ball it's probably where he's going to meet Juliet if they're following the original story. The day of the ball, Rosalind's dad sets her up with a new potential suitor to get married to, and this one looks more promising because he's younger, he's hot. This man is named Dario, and he overhears Rosaline complaining to her dad about getting an arranged marriage and how she hates this, and then she has to come out and meet him and basically spend the day with him to get to know him and see if it could be a good match. During their date, Rosaline is very upset, but they do have fun banter together. You can right away see the potential enemies to lovers dynamic brewing under their interactions. Dario takes her on his boat as their date, but she's like, I gotta get back home in 30 minutes. On the boat, she admits that she has a secret boyfriend, and that's where Dario kind of gives up slightly on pursuing her as hard. They do get stuck out there for the entirety of the ball, and once Rosaline gets to the ball, it's totally over. And we see that Romeo at the ball is looking around for Rosaline, and he locks eyes with Juliet, and the rest is history. It's so annoying how fickle Romeo is because, and we knew this from the original play, but this movie plays into that, and it's funny to see he was so in love with Rosaline like the day before and then just totally ditches her for Juliet, which is actually what happens in the play. So once you dig into the Rosaline storyline in the original story, you're like, wait, Romeo just kind of falls in love with whoever's in front of him. They're like literally teenagers. I thought right off the bat this movie incorporated a lot of fun comedy. Like when Rosaline is hesitant to get on Dario's boat and he's like, oh, you're afraid of the water? And she's like, no, I have fear of fish. It's not afraid to be silly, and I really respect that in a movie. So after Rosaline misses the ball, the next day she's hoping Romeo will come. She's trying to send him letters apologizing. She sees Romeo on her property, but he goes somewhere else, not to her balcony. So she follows him, and that's where she sees Romeo at Juliet's balcony, which is the most famous scene we know from the original. They don't say word for word the script of the original scene, but we see Romeo and Juliet on her balcony. Rosaline is heartbroken about this. From her angle, though, she can't tell who Juliet is quite yet. The next day, Rosaline's extended family comes over. It's her aunt and uncle, and they bring her two cousins, Tybalt. We know Tybalt, he's the Capulet cousin, but also they bring Juliet. And Rosaline had not seen her since she came back from finishing school, and she kind of had a big glow up, so that's why she didn't recognize her on her balcony. When they go off on their own together, Juliet admits that she has a secret boyfriend in Romeo, and Rosaline's just like fuming on the inside. So Rosaline tells her, "Oh, I know he said this romantic thing to you," and Juliet's like, "How do you know?" And Rosaline's like, "Well, Romeo's been doing that to all the girls. Not me, though." So Rosaline tells her the truth, which I was kind of surprised. I thought Rosaline was gonna hold back here and not say that Romeo was a fake. But she doesn't admit that it was her because she doesn't want to look foolish in front of Juliet. Juliet feels all foolish for falling for it. Juliet kind of has like great mature reaction to this, though, and is like, "I'm not gonna see him anymore." And Rosaline's like, "Great, I'll help you cut him off and ignore him." So Rosaline and Juliet spend a lot of time together. This is our montage of the rom-com where we see them spending time together doing activities. We see that Juliet is good at a lot of things, where Rosaline is more, flawed and relatable. But we kind of see how Rosaline at first is upset with Juliet, doesn't like her, and grows to appreciate and like her, spending all this time with her. However, she still has this plan in her mind of keeping Romeo and Juliet apart. At first, I kind of thought this movie was just going to use Romeo and Juliet at the beginning, and once we saw Romeo ditch Rosaline, we wouldn't see them again, and it would just become the Rosaline and Dario love story. And I'm kind of glad Romeo and Juliet and their story was interwoven with the entire movie. I feel like if they would have ignored them after they got together and then brought them back at the end, it would have felt like they just wanted to tell a random rom-com and bookend it with a story everyone knows, just to get people clicking on it for familiarity reasons. But no, the Romeo and Juliet characters are interwoven with the entirety of the plot. As much as Juliet was good at everything too, she kind of gave me a Cat Valentine energy. That was Ariana Grande's character on Victorious on Nickelodeon. I wonder if this actress takes some inspo from Ariana's Cat Valentine, who is very famously ditzy, and Juliet had that ditzy vibe in this movie. So let's get into our obstacles that Rosaline faces. Eventually, Juliet notices this necklace that Rosaline is wearing that is engraved with Romeo and Rosaline. It was a gift from Romeo at the beginning of the movie. So this makes it clear that Rosaline was the one who Romeo duped in the first time, and her still wearing the necklace proves that she's still in love with Romeo. So Juliet argues with Rosaline and tells her she's going to be with Romeo and Romeo's not going to go back with her. Eventually, Rosaline convinces her best friend Paris to court Juliet because Paris is gay and is having trouble pleasing his parents because he doesn't want to get engaged to a woman. So Rosaline thinks it's a perfect scenario where he could get engaged to Juliet for 2 to 3 years from now, and that'll keep Juliet away from Romeo for that time while she figures out how to seduce Romeo or get him back or whatever. Paris is pretty convinced, and it's like, that sounds like a good idea. As long as I don't have to marry her anytime soon, that sounds great. Juliet's parents are also happy about this because Paris is a count and has a good status, so they're thrilled that Juliet can get married to someone of high status like that. And of course, Juliet is very upset when her parents tell her, "You're engaged to this Paris guy." After this, Rosaline finds a letter from Romeo to Juliet saying they're going to elope at the friar's place. So Rosaline goes to try to stop Romeo and Juliet's secret wedding, and she runs into Dario while she's running to go do that. Dario and Rosaline go together to try to stop this wedding, but they have to go to Montague land, and they end up getting chased by Montagues away, nearly getting attacked, and so they have to escape on horseback. This little adventure is a fun one because Dario and Rosaline get to bond a lot. They get to talk about why she's so obsessed with Romeo, and she gets to do some reflection about that, and she gets to learn more about him. Towards the end, he tells her that he's going to rejoin the military and leave because nothing's keeping him here because she rejected him. And after this whole escapade, Rosaline realizes she's not really in love with Romeo anymore, and she's being petty to her cousin. So she returns all of Romeo's letters that she had stolen earlier to Juliet via Steve the courier, who is kind of a spacey and bro-y mail delivery guy. And because Steve is a little spacey, he gives the letters to Tybalt, who sees them, and Tybalt finds out about the affair, tells everybody, and the families go to feud at the town square, and that's where Romeo kills Tybalt, which is a part in the original as well, and the families declare war on each other. I do think Steve the courier was one of my favorite small characters in this. He was so funny in his delivery, and this actor is just really good at that. I mean, he's been in other things. I also love how they incorporated Paris into the story, because when we were first introduced to him, I didn't remember if Paris was someone from the original story, and I was like, that does sound familiar, but who is he? And then later on we see, oh, he's the one that is engaged to Juliet later on in the play. I love how they incorporated him because so many times the best friends of the protagonist, especially when they're queer, they are very one-dimensional and are just there to give sassy remarks or support the main character in times of stress. But in this case, he had his own backstory in his mind because he is explicitly gay, by the way. I just love that he had his own goals in mind of his own parents pressuring him and wanting to get them off his back. And I loved his character. I loved his acting. Great job to him. I just saw in an interview that he is a newcomer to acting, and I just loved his portrayal. And normally I don't care that Tybalt died, but in this case I was so sad because the actor was just so funny, everything he was saying. So F's in the chat for Tybalt. So moving into our climax, Rosaline feels horrible because she feels she was at fault for Tybalt dying and everyone finding out about Romeo and Juliet. So she hatches a new plan to help Romeo and Juliet out. She goes to Dario on his boat. He's about to leave for the military, and stops him and is like, I'm sure you heard about the mess that happened today and I need your help. And Dario graciously accepts to help her. Rosaline and Dario go to Juliet's room and tell her, this is our plan, we're gonna sneak y'all off on our boat and y'all can live happily ever after in some other place. And Juliet's like, no, I already have my own plan, and this is the plan we're all familiar with. That she is going to fake her own death. Rosaline tells her that is such a stupid plan, and I felt like when she told her that, it was like generations of audiences, what we wish we could say to Juliet in the original play and stop her from being an idiot. So that was kind of a satisfying moment where Rosaline's like, that is so stupid. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Stupidest plan ever. But eventually Juliet collapses because she had already started the plan. Rosaline and Dario try to take her on the boat anyway, collapse. But they get caught. Dario runs away when they get caught, and Rosaline is there with a collapsed Juliet, so she gets blamed for killing Juliet and imprisoned in their home. However, Rosaline's dad comes in. It looks like he's not gonna let her out, but then he frees her from the prison. It was nice that the dad was like good all along, because he had been kind of a good guy throughout, just doing what he needed to do. But at the same time, he secretly rooted for Rosaline. So Rosaline runs to the church where Juliet's body is getting prepped for burial and finds Romeo there, collapsed on her. They try to trick us, the audience. We think, oh no, Rosaline is too late. They're both dead already. This is the end. And then Romeo wakes up and is like, oh, I'm fine. Dario told me everything. And we see that Dario, we thought he had run away before, like in a cowardly way, but he was actually running to tell Romeo the whole plan. so that Romeo wouldn't kill himself upon hearing the news. So now Romeo is going to fake his death in front of all the family so that they can both fake their death and then run away together. Eventually the two families come in and they're devastated by it. There's one point, which is also in the original, where Juliet wakes up from the poison when everyone's there and then kisses Romeo to get the poison again and dies again in front of the family, and they think it's weird. So they get the nurse to confirm if they're dead, and the nurse confirms it even though she knows the whole plan. And it was a nice arc for the nurse, though it was unfair because the whole movie she was like, I'm a registered nurse, please respect me, and no one would. So at the end she got to like use her nurse knowledge, which was just checking a pulse, which back in like medieval times checking a pulse was hard-hitting science, I'm assuming. And it was funny, the nurse got her like official nurse moment. So because both of the lovers are dead, Rosaline scolds the two families about, look what you've done, and that's where the families admit they don't remember what they're fighting about and they should stop fighting. And that brings peace between the Capulets and the Montagues in honor of their dead children. After the families leave, Rosaline and Dario take Romeo and Juliet to the boat and send them off on their way to a new life. And after that is when Rosaline and Dario finally get their own happy ending and kiss. There is a mid-credits scene where we see Romeo and Juliet on the boat, and it's extremely awkward and they can't find anything in common. Kind of realizing that they committed to each other too soon without saying that out loud. And I think the lessons learned from the movie are mostly for Rosaline. The movie centers her a lot. She's a very clear main character. She's already independent and outspoken, and I think part of the lesson is that she got rewarded for that in the end, in that she ended up happiest, even happier than Romeo and Juliet seemed to be. So she stayed true to herself, but she also grew, like how she was hateful towards Juliet at first and then grew to appreciate her and all of her talents and her kindness. And also she learned lessons about love, like don't miss out on the love right in front of you with the person you actually have things in common with, like Dario, rather than just getting hung up on an ex that said pretty poetry. I appreciated that final message. I just thought the whole movie, it was like constant comedy in a way that didn't feel like just rattling off jokes. Like I said, not offending anyone, poking fun at the original Romeo and Juliet, poking fun at itself. I think that's one of the biggest keys to comedy, and they did it really well, especially for it being such a rehashed story. Like they really made it fresh, and I think that's a big deal to be able to do as a movie. It is still kind of in the reboot realm of movie making, which isn't usually my favorite, but because they did such a new twist on it, I will forgive it. I would love to hear your thoughts on Rosaline in the comments below. Do you agree more with critics or think it's even worse than that? Or do you agree more with me and think it was actually a really decent and fun, good movie? Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed. I put out new videos once or twice a week about TV, pop culture, internet trends, and other miscellaneous things. And you can follow me at Miscellaneous on Instagram or Twitter to find out about new videos, or just turn on the bell notification here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!